An entire Roman legion simply vanished from the pages of history. Over 5,000 professional soldiers, the formidable Ninth Legion, known as the Roman IX Hispana, marched into the mists of northern Britain and were never seen again. This is not just a story of defeat. It is antiquity's greatest cold case, a mystery that has baffled historians for nearly 2,000 years. We are going to sift through the clues, from crumbling inscriptions to ancient whispers, and piece together the most compelling theories about their fate. You will walk away understanding not just what might have happened, but how a story this old can still send a chill down your spine. What does it take for 5,000 men to disappear without a single clear trace? And why has their story refused to be forgotten? What is the one mystery from the ancient world you wish you could solve? The last certain evidence of the Ninth Legion's existence comes from a stone slab. Around the year 108, an inscription was carved in the fortress at York, modern-day England, recording the Legion's rebuilding efforts in stone. And then nothing. The historical record, which had meticulously tracked the Legion's movements for centuries, falls into an absolute and eerie silence. For the Roman Empire, this was not merely a military setback. It was an administrative impossibility. Legions were the backbone of imperial power, each one a self-contained city of 5,000 professional soldiers, supported by thousands more camp followers. Their strength, location, and payroll were documented with an almost obsessive bureaucracy. Losing one was like a modern nation misplacing an entire aircraft carrier battle group, crew and all, with no distress call and no wreckage ever found. This was far more than a battle lost. It was a complete and total erasure. The Ninth simply stepped off the edge of the known world, leaving behind a void that has echoed with questions for nearly 2,000 years. How does something that large, that organized, simply cease to be? This was a legion forged in fire and blood, long before it vanished into the mist. To understand the magnitude of its loss, you must first know the sheer power of what was lost. The Ninth Legion, the Roman IX Hispana, was one of the oldest and most respected fighting forces in the entire Roman Empire. It was originally raised by the legendary general Pompey the Great around the year 65 BC, during the final days of the Republic. Its first great trial came in the savage wars to conquer the Iberian Peninsula, a land the Romans called Hispania. The legion fought for a decade against fierce native tribes, and its performance was so distinguished that it earned the permanent honorific title Hispana. This was not just a name, it was a badge of courage, a testament to its battle-hardened origins. This veteran unit then marched under the command of Julius Caesar himself during his epic Gallic Wars. It stood with him at the pivotal Battle of Pharsalus, and it was the Ninth that famously mutinied after Caesar's assassination, demanding better rewards for its decades of loyal service. Over the next century and a half, the Legion was a pillar of the empire. It was stationed on the Rhine frontier, holding back Germanic tribes. It helped put down a massive rebellion in Judea, and it eventually found itself on the cold, northern edge of the world, in the province of Britannia. This was not some raw, inexperienced garrison. This was an elite, mobile field army, a force of 5,000 professional soldiers who represented the absolute peak of Roman military might. Each man carried decades of institutional knowledge and battle experience. Their sudden, complete disappearance is not the story of a weak unit crumbling. It is the story of a titan stumbling and falling, with no one left to tell how or why. How does a legion with 2 centuries of glorious history just stop existing? The stage for this disappearance was the very edge of the known world. Britannia was the Roman Empire's Wild West, a province only partially tamed. While the southern lowlands were dotted with Roman villas and bustling towns, the north remained a land of misty mountains and impenetrable forests. This was a frontier defined by its volatility, a place where Roman rule was a thin veneer over ancient tribal lands. Two groups dominated this rugged landscape. First were the Brigantes, a powerful confederation who controlled much of what is now northern England. They were nominally Roman allies, but their loyalty was always a shifting, uncertain thing. Further north, beyond the reach of Roman roads, were the Picts, the Painted People. These fierce tribes of the lands we now call Scotland were a constant and terrifying threat to the legions. They were masters of guerrilla warfare, striking from the mist and melting back into the hills, an enemy that the rigid, disciplined Roman war machine was ill-equipped to handle. To secure this chaotic border, the Romans eventually built one of the most famous fortifications in history, Hadrian's Wall. This massive stone barrier, stretching from coast to coast, was a stark declaration. On one side was the ordered world of Rome, with its laws and its legions. On the other was a wilderness Rome could not conquer, only wall out. This was precisely the kind of hostile environment that demanded a legion like the IX Hispana. An elite, veteran force was the only thing that could project power into this brutal terrain, pacify rebellious tribes, and launch punitive expeditions into the lands of the Picts. They were the empire's fire brigade, sent to the place where the flames of rebellion and invasion burned hottest. And it was here, in this land of shadows and constant threat, that the legion's long and illustrious history finally goes dark. The most solid ground we stand on in this entire mystery is a single stone. Around the year 108, deep within the fortress at Eboracum, modern-day York, a mason carefully carved an inscription. It records that the 9th Legion, the Hispana, rebuilt the Principia, the legionary headquarters, in stone. This is not a story or a rumor, it is a fact set in rock. The legion was here, it was active, and it was strong enough to undertake a major construction project. This slab of stone is our last certain sighting of the 9th Legion in the historical record. After this point, the light simply goes out. But then another stone appears hundreds of miles away that throws the entire mystery into confusion. In the modern-day Netherlands, at a Roman fort called Novaya Magus, which we know as Nijmegen, a tantalizing piece of evidence was found. It is a terracotta tile, and stamped into its surface are the letters LEGH-ISP. This is widely interpreted as Legio Hispana, the Hispanic Legion. The tile dates to a period after the York inscription, sometime in the early 2nd century. This single fragile artifact is the foundation for the most popular alternative theory, that the 9th Legion was not destroyed in Britain at all, but was simply transferred to the Rhine frontier to fight in other wars. This creates the central conflict at the heart of the mystery. On one hand, you have the undeniable silence from Britain, a province known for its violent unrest. On the other, you have this lone tile from the continent. But is that tile proof of a relocation? Or is it merely a relic from an earlier time? Legions often left behind materials, and stamps could have been reused. The tile does not say the 9th Legion was present and building in Nijmegen after 108. It only confirms that a tile with its stamp ended up there. This is the frustrating nature of archaeological evidence. A stone inscription in York tells us the legion was definitively there. A stamped tile in Nijmegen only suggests it might have been there later. This tiny, baked piece of clay is the fragile thread upon which the entire transfer theory hangs. If it snaps, the legion's fate swings back toward the misty highlands of the north. This single stamped tile creates a fragile lifeline for the legion, a possibility of survival far from Britain's shores. But we must also confront the darker, more dramatic possibility. the theory that has fueled imaginations for centuries. What if the Ninth Legion met its end, not in a quiet transfer, but in a storm of violence on the very frontier it was sent to hold? The Caledonian catastrophe theory suggests exactly that, a final, terrible battle in the misty highlands of what is now Scotland. Imagine the scene: the Legion, 5,000 men strong, is marching north on a punitive campaign. Their mission is to crush a brewing rebellion among the Caledonian tribes, a coalition of fierce warriors who refuse to bow to Rome. The landscape itself is their enemy. This is not the open, rolling countryside ideal for legionary formations. It is a world of dense, ancient forests, of steep, boggy glens, and of a constant, chilling mist that clings to the hills. Visibility drops to nothing. The sounds of the march, the clanking of armor and the tramp of thousands of feet, echo unnaturally in the fog. The Romans are marching blind. Then from the mist, a hail of spears and sling stones. The Caledonii, masters of this terrain, attack not as a unified army but as a swarm. They strike the column's flanks and rear, using the land as a weapon. They funnel the tightly packed Romans into a narrow pass where their numerical advantage means nothing. The discipline that made the legion invincible on an open field becomes a death trap in the tight, chaotic confines of a forest glen. There is no room to form battle lines, no space for their famous shield wall. It becomes a brutal, close-quarters massacre, a relentless onslaught from an enemy that appears and vanishes like ghosts. The battle turns into a rout, and then into a slaughter. The legion is cut down, man by man, until not a single soldier remains to tell the tale of its destruction. The victorious tribes, following their own customs, would have stripped the bodies and the battlefield clean. Armor, weapons, and any valuable insignia would be taken as trophies or melted down. The bodies of the fallen would be left to the carrion birds and the harsh elements, their bones slowly scattering and sinking into the peat bogs that dominate the region. This would explain the utter lack of archaeological evidence. There is no mass grave to find, no final battlefield littered with Roman equipment. The land itself consumed the legion, leaving no trace beyond the echoing silence in the historical record. It is a scenario that fits the known hostility of the North and the total nature of the legion's disappearance. One day, the IX Hispana was the sharp end of Roman spear in Britannia. The next, it was simply gone, its final story written not on stone, but in the treacherous soil of a land it could never truly conquer. A century before the legion vanished, the historian Tacitus provided a chilling foreshadowing. Writing about the campaigns of his father-in-law, Agricola, around the year 82, he describes a moment of pure terror for the Ninth. While camped for the night, a force of Caledonian tribesmen launched a surprise assault. The attackers broke right into the legion's camp, and a brutal melee erupted within the fortifications themselves. Tacitus writes that only the arrival of Agricola's main force at dawn saved the Ninth from utter annihilation. This was not a minor skirmish. This was a full-scale breach of a fortified Roman camp, a near-catastrophic failure that exposed the legion's vulnerability in that harsh northern landscape. It proves that the Ninth had already come perilously close to destruction in Britain. Decades before its final disappearance, the memory of that night would have lingered, a ghost in the legion's collective mind, a demonstration that even the mighty legions of Rome were not invincible in the land of the Picts. Then we have the account of Cassius Dio, writing decades after the legion was gone. His history of Rome's wars in Britain during the reign of Emperor Hadrian is fragmentary, but one surviving passage is explosive. He states that at the time Hadrian came to power, quote, "The Romans were having the worst of it in Britannia." He reports that the Britons could not be kept under Roman control, and that a great number of both soldiers and their leaders perished. This is a vague but powerful reference to a major military disaster, coinciding almost exactly with the time the 9th Legion vanishes from our records. Could this unnamed catastrophe, this moment when the Romans were having the worst of it, be the final chapter of the 9th Hispana? The timeline fits perfectly. The Legion's last known presence in York was around 108. Hadrian became emperor in 117, and his famous wall was begun in 122, a project widely seen as a direct response to severe military instability on the northern frontier. The wall was not a celebration of conquest. It was a defensive barrier built in the wake of a crisis. These literary whispers from Tacitus and Cassius Dio do not give us a clear answer, but they paint a picture of a consistently dangerous and volatile province. One source shows the 9th nearly destroyed generations earlier. The other hints at a massive loss of Roman life right when the Legion disappears. When you place these ancient testimonies alongside the silent archaeology, the story deepens. We are no longer just looking at a missing legion, but at a pattern of brutal conflict on the edge of the empire, a cycle of violence that may have finally consumed one of Rome's most storied fighting units. The mystery then shifts from a single event to a more profound question about the very nature of Rome's hold on Britannia, a grip that was always more fragile than the empire cared to admit. That fragile tile from Nijmegen, stamped with the Legion's mark, seems to offer a simple escape from a grim fate in Britain. This is the transfer theory, a clean and logical explanation. The argument goes that the 9th Legion was not annihilated but simply reassigned. Sometime after that last inscription in York, the entire unit, all 5,000 men, received orders to march to the Rhine frontier. The empire was constantly shifting its forces to meet new threats, and the Rhine was a perpetual trouble spot. The tile, stamped Legio Hispana, is presented as proof of their new continental base. It suggests the Legion was alive and well, building forts and baking tiles far from the treacherous highlands of Caledonia. This theory turns a terrifying mystery into a mundane administrative event. The Legion did not vanish, it just moved, and the historical record simply failed to note its final destination or its ultimate dissolution decades later. It is a comforting thought that this proud unit simply faded away through bureaucracy rather than bloodshed. But we must ask, does this single piece of baked clay truly bear the weight of this conclusion? The counter-arguments are compelling and cast a long shadow of doubt over this neat solution. First, legions did not operate as a single, monolithic block. They frequently sent out vexellations, large detachments of several hundred men, to serve in other provinces or on other campaigns. It is entirely possible that a detachment from the 9th Hispana was sent to the Rhine long before the legion's disappearance, perhaps during Emperor Trajan's Dacian Wars, and that this group was the one that produced the tile. The stamp would then be a relic of that earlier detachment, not evidence of the entire legion's presence after 108. Second, the dating of archaeological evidence is not always precise. The context in which the tile was found is crucial. If the archaeological layer it was discovered in was disturbed, or if the dating of that layer is based on styles of pottery that span decades, then the tile's assignment to a post-120 date becomes less certain. It could be older, a leftover from an earlier era when we know for certain the 9th was still in Britain. Finally, there is the problem of misattribution. The stamp itself is fragmentary, reading only LEGH-ISP. While this almost certainly means Legio Hispana, it is not 100% conclusive. Could it refer to another unit? The Romans were meticulous, but we are interpreting a broken message from 2 millennia ago. When you hold up this one ambiguous tile against the deafening silence from Britain, the complete absence of any other record of the ninth on the continent after 108, the transfer theory begins to look less like a solid fact and more like a hopeful guess. This tiny artifact becomes a red herring, a tantalizing clue that might be leading us away from the truth, not toward it. So where does this leave us? Chasing a ghost legion across a continent, or standing in the misty silence of northern Britain, wondering what the land itself is still hiding? While the stamped tile offers a fragile thread of hope, another discovery from the northern frontier gives us something far more valuable: the actual voices of the people who lived there. At the fort of Vindolanda, just south of what would become Hadrian's Wall, archaeologists unearthed a collection of writing tablets so personal they feel like a crackle of static from the past. These are not grand imperial pronouncements carved in stone. They are private letters, military reports, and birthday party invitations, all written in ink on thin slivers of wood. They survived 2 millennia because they were discarded in waterlogged, oxygen-free soil, a perfect environment for preservation. Through these fragile notes, we can hear the whispers of the men and women stationed at the edge of the world. We read strength reports detailing the exact number of soldiers present, absent, or ill. One such report from a cavalry unit lists 952 men, with 31 away on assignments and 15 sick. This bureaucratic minutiae reveals the Roman army's obsessive need to account for every single soldier, a system that makes the total disappearance of 5,000 men even more baffling. The tablets also paint a picture of a perpetually tense and dangerous environment. There are urgent requests for more supplies, mentions of conflicts with the Britons, and a famous letter describing the native tribes as incapable of being controlled because they travel lightly and launch sudden attacks. The soldiers complain about the cold, the mud, and the terrible local beer. They send for more socks and underwear to cope with the miserable climate. This is the human reality of the frontier, a place of constant, low-level anxiety punctuated by sudden violence. This is the exact context in which a legion could go missing. In a land where communication was slow and the fog of war was literal, a single legion, marching north on a punitive expedition, could be isolated. A swift, coordinated attack by local tribes could overwhelm them before reinforcements could even be summoned. The Vindolanda tablets do not record the fate of the IX Hispana, but they powerfully illustrate the world it inhabited, a world where the line between order and chaos was as thin as the wood of a writing tablet. They show us that the Roman hold on Britannia was always tenuous, maintained by a handful of cold, homesick men staring into the mist, never quite sure what was moving in the shadows beyond the fort's walls. The whispers from Vindolanda give us the authentic voice of the frontier, but it was a work of pure imagination that would shout the legion's story to the world. In 1954, author Rosemary Sutcliffe published a novel that would single-handedly define the legend for generations, The Eagle of the Ninth. This book did not just tell a story. It created a myth so powerful and emotionally compelling that it has become, for many, the default truth. Sutcliffe's narrative follows a young Roman officer, Marcus Flavius Aquila, who travels north of Hadrian's Wall into the dangerous lands of the Picts. His mission is to recover the lost standard of his father's legion, the IX Hispana, and to uncover the truth behind its disappearance. The story is a masterpiece of historical fiction, weaving a tale of honor, loss, and redemption against the brooding backdrop of ancient Britain. It is a brilliant and moving story, but it is crucial to remember that it is a story. Sutcliffe took the known facts, the legion's last known location and its mysterious end, and crafted a breathtaking narrative around the theory of its annihilation in Scotland. Her version of events, with its dramatic final battle, and the standard lost in the wild, felt so real and so satisfying that it cemented the Caledonian catastrophe as the most popular explanation. The novel's immense success was followed by film and television adaptations, most notably the 2011 movie The Eagle, which brought this vivid, tragic version of the legend to a global audience. These adaptations did not just entertain, they educated. For millions, this fictional account became their primary, and sometimes only, introduction to the mystery. This is the immense power and the profound responsibility of historical fiction. It can breathe life into dusty facts and make the distant past feel immediate and human. A good story makes us care. It makes us remember, but in doing so, it can also accidentally replace nuanced, uncertain history with a clear and compelling narrative. We are left with a fascinating dilemma. Does the story of Marcus Aquila searching for the Eagle Standard help us understand the Ninth Legion? Or does it ultimately obscure the more complicated, less cinematic truth? The real mystery may not be what happened to the Legion, but why we are so drawn to one particular version of its end. We prefer a heroic, tragic finale in the misty highlands to the ambiguous possibility of a bureaucratic transfer or a slow disintegration elsewhere. The Eagle of the Ninth gave us a beautiful and terrible end for the Lost Legion, an ending so perfect that the real history struggles to compete. Perhaps the Legion did not fall in a glorious last stand, but was instead dismantled by the very empire it served. There is a quieter, more administrative theory for the disappearance of the IX Hispana, one that trades the drama of a battlefield for the cold finality of a bureaucratic decree. This is the dissolution theory, the idea that the Legion was not wiped out, but was formally disbanded in disgrace. For a Roman legion, its honor was its lifeblood. A legion's name, its battle honors, and its eagle standard were symbols of its spirit and its sacred trust with Rome. To have that honor stripped away was a fate many soldiers would have considered worse than death. So what crime could a legion of such storied history commit to warrant such an erasure? The most likely reasons point to a catastrophic failure that fell short of total annihilation, but was severe enough to shatter the unit's reputation forever. Imagine a scenario where the Ninth was tasked with putting down a major rebellion, but instead suffered a humiliating defeat. Perhaps it was ambushed and lost its sacred eagle standard to the enemy, an unimaginable disgrace. The Legion may have retreated in a panic, abandoning its post and leaving a Roman province exposed. The physical unit might have survived, but its spirit, its dignitas, was broken beyond repair. In the eyes of Rome, a legion that had proven itself unreliable was worse than useless. It was a liability. There is also the dark shadow of mutiny. The Ninth had a history of it, having revolted after Caesar's assassination. If it mutinied again, perhaps refusing a direct order from the emperor during a critical campaign, the response would have been swift and severe. The ringleaders would be executed, and the entire legion could be made an example of. The punishment was not just for the men, but for the memory of the legion itself. The emperor would order the IX Hispana to be struck from the army rolls. Its number would be retired, never to be used again. The surviving soldiers would be dispersed in disgrace, sent to other legions on the empire's most dangerous frontiers, their past service and identity erased. They would be forbidden from ever speaking of their former unit. This official damnation would explain the silence perfectly. The Roman historical record, often written to glorify the empire and its emperors, would have no interest in recording a shameful episode. It would be far better for the chroniclers to simply let the legion fade from history, as if it had never existed. This theory turns the mystery inward, away from the swords of the Picts, and toward the cold, unforgiving heart of the empire itself. The ninth's end was not an external catastrophe, but an internal execution. Another possibility sends the legion on a long march to the empire's eastern frontier, far from the damp fogs of Britain. This is the Eastern Front hypothesis, a theory that the IX Hispana was not destroyed in the early 2nd century, but was transferred to fight the Parthian Empire and met its end decades later. The Parthians were Rome's great superpower rival in the East, a wealthy and powerful empire controlling the lands of modern-day Iran and Iraq. Their formidable cavalry, especially the heavily armored cataphracts and the swift horse archers, were a constant threat. The Roman eastern frontier was a theater of massive, set-piece battles, a world away from the guerrilla warfare of northern Britain. The reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius was marked by immense turmoil, and it was during one of these eastern conflicts that we find a potential clue. The Roman historian Lucian records a devastating Roman defeat at the city of Elijah in Armenia in the year 161. He writes that an entire Roman legion was slaughtered there by the Parthians. The legion in this account is not named, leaving a tantalizing gap. Could this anonymous, annihilated legion have been the long-lost IX Hispana? If true, this would mean the legion survived for over 50 years after its last appearance in York, only to be wiped out in a different war on the opposite side of the empire. The appeal of this theory is its clean fit with a known historical disaster. It provides a specific battle, a specific enemy, and a credible reason for a legion's destruction. Yet, the evidence for this idea is extraordinarily thin, resting entirely on an absence. Since we do not know which legion was destroyed at Elijah, some historians have suggested it could have been the missing ninth. This is an argument from silence, a logical leap that uses one mystery to try and solve another. The case against the Eastern Front hypothesis is far stronger. By the middle of the 2nd century, there is no positive evidence whatsoever that the IX Hispana still existed. Military diplomas, which were bronze certificates issued to retiring auxiliary soldiers, list the legions in service at the time they were issued. These documents from the reign of Emperor Hadrian and his successor, Antoninus Pius, do not include the IX Hispana. This is a powerful administrative silence. If the legion were still an active, functioning unit, its name should appear on these official rolls. Its absence strongly suggests it was already gone from the Roman army list long before the Battle of Elijah. Furthermore, moving a legion from Britain to the east was a monumental undertaking. Such a massive redeployment would have left traces in the historical record, or at least in the archaeological record at forts along the way. We find nothing, no inscriptions, no stray tiles, no evidence of its passage. The Eastern Front hypothesis offers a dramatic and specific end for the legion, but it asks us to believe that it survived invisibly for half a century, only to disappear again in another unrecorded catastrophe. It solves one mystery by creating several more, leaving us to wonder if we are just chasing the legion's ghost from one end of the empire to the other. Emperor Hadrian inherited an empire stretched to its breaking point. When he assumed power in the year 117, the Roman world was reeling from constant, costly wars of expansion pursued by his predecessor, Trajan. Hadrian was a different kind of ruler, a pragmatic consolidator who looked at the vast territories of Rome and saw not glory, but vulnerability. His grand strategy was a fundamental shift from conquest to containment, and his actions in Britannia provide the most compelling evidence of a recent, severe trauma. His famous visit to the province in the year 122 was not a victory tour. It was an inspection following a crisis. The decision he announced there was monumental, a complete reversal of Roman policy in the north. He ordered the construction of a massive stone wall, 80 Roman miles long, spanning the entire width of Britain. This was not a temporary fortification. It was a permanent, symbolic, and strategic declaration that Rome's northward expansion was over. The empire was now drawing a line in the soil and saying, "We go no further." But what could have prompted such a dramatic change in strategy? A wall of that scale was an admission of weakness, not a display of strength. It signaled that the tribes beyond it could not be controlled, only blocked. The timing is the crucial clue. Hadrian's wall was begun just a few years, perhaps only a decade or so, after the 9th Legion vanished from our records. This is unlikely to be a coincidence. The loss of an entire legion, a full 20% of the military force in Britain, would have been a catastrophic shock to the imperial system. Such a devastating blow would have proven that the North could not be held by offensive campaigns alone. It would have revealed the utter failure of the forward policy, showing Hadrian that sending legions deep into Caledonia was an invitation to disaster. The wall, then, can be seen as the empire's direct response to that disaster. It was a way to secure the vulnerable province, to prevent future massacres, and to create a manageable, defensible frontier. The silence surrounding the Ninth's fate becomes even more profound when viewed through this lens. The empire had a vested interest in forgetting a humiliation that forced it to change its entire approach to a province. The wall itself stands as a silent, stone memorial to the 5,000 men who marched into the mists and never returned, the ghost that shaped the very landscape of Roman Britain. The most compelling theories often crash against the silence of the earth itself. For all the power of the Caledonian catastrophe narrative, it faces one enormous, unanswered question. Where is the battlefield? The annihilation of a 5,000-man legion would be one of the largest military engagements ever fought on ancient British soil. Such a colossal event should leave an indelible mark on the landscape. A scatter of broken swords, lost coins, and shattered armor. Yet not a single piece of conclusive evidence has ever been found. No mass grave holding the remains of Roman soldiers. No concentrated debris field of pilum heads or legionary helmets. The ground has yielded no testament to this final, terrible confrontation. This profound archaeological silence is the single greatest challenge to the story of a heroic last stand. If the legion died in battle, the land has stubbornly refused to give up its secret. The reasons for this are as complex as the Scottish landscape itself. The Highlands are a vast, rugged, and often impenetrable wilderness. Dense forests have grown and receded over 2 millennia. Peat bogs have expanded, swallowing entire valleys under layers of acidic, waterlogged soil. Rivers have changed their courses, and centuries of weathering have eroded hillsides and filled in gullies. Finding a single battlefield in this immense and changing terrain is like searching for a needle in a continent-sized haystack. We must also consider the chemistry of the very ground beneath our feet. The soils in much of northern Britain are highly acidic. This type of environment is devastating to the preservation of organic materials and metal. A soldier's body, left on the field, would decompose rapidly. His bones, unless buried deep in a protective layer like an anaerobic bog, would dissolve back into the earth, leaving no trace for modern archaeologists. The iron in his sword, his dagger, and the nails in his sandals would corrode into a brittle reddish stain. A mere ghost of the object it once was. Only under very specific conditions, like the waterlogged, oxygen-free environment that preserved the Vindolanda tablets, do things survive for centuries. A battlefield, exposed to the elements on a hillside, offers no such protection. The victorious tribes would have conducted a thorough and systematic scavenging of the site. To them, this would have been a treasure trove. Tons of high-quality iron for tools and weapons, valuable brass and bronze for ornaments, and the symbolic power of captured legionary standards and an eagle. They would have stripped the field clean, leaving little behind for us to find 2,000 years later. This combination of a vast, difficult search area, destructive soil chemistry, and post-battle looting creates a perfect storm of invisibility. The absence of evidence is frustrating, but it is not evidence of absence. It simply means the final chapter of the IX Hispana is still out there, waiting under a blanket of peat or deep within a forgotten forest glen, for the one discovery that could rewrite history in a single, breathtaking moment. The eagle was not merely a symbol, it was the soul of the Legion, cast in silver or gold, with wings outstretched. This sacred standard was carried into battle by its own dedicated protector, the Archaeological. To lose the eagle was to lose the Legion's very spirit, an eternal shame that could stain the honor of Rome itself. For the men of the IX Hispana, their eagle was a physical manifestation of their 2 centuries of history, a divine object they were sworn to protect with their lives. So what became of it? The fate of the eagle is the ultimate clue in the mystery of the Legion's end. If the Ninth was transferred or disbanded, its eagle would have been formally retired, perhaps sent back to Rome in a quiet ceremony of disgrace. But if it fell in battle, the story of its eagle becomes a far more dramatic and tragic tale. We can picture the final, desperate moments of a doomed battle in the north. The Archaeological, the eagle-bearer, realizing all is lost, might have torn the sacred standard from its pole. His duty would have been to deny the enemy their ultimate prize. He could have buried it deep in the peat, or thrown it into a dark, bottomless loch, consigning the Legion's soul to the earth and water of the land that defeated it. Alternatively, the eagle could have been captured. For a Caledonian chieftain, displaying a Roman eagle in his great hall would be the supreme trophy, a tangible sign that he had broken the might of the empire. It might have been passed down through generations as a sacred relic of a great victory, its metal slowly tarnishing in the smoky air of a chieftain's hall, far from the ordered world it represented. Or in a final, pragmatic act, it could have been melted down. The precious metal would be too tempting to leave as a symbol. It might have been reforged into torques or arm rings, the soul of the IX Hispana literally recast into the wealth and power of the tribes that destroyed it. The silence of the eagle is deafening. No Roman account records its recovery, and no tribal horde has ever yielded a legionary standard. Its disappearance is a perfect echo of the Legion's own. To find the eagle would be to solve the mystery, but its absence tells its own powerful story. The Legion and its soul vanished together, leaving us to wonder if we are searching for 5,000 men, or for a single, silent bird of silver, lost somewhere in the mist. Decades before the Legion vanished into the northern mists, it had already stared into the abyss. The memory of the Boudiccan revolt would have been a ghost haunting the veteran soldiers of the Ninth. A brutal lesson that the tribes of Britannia could rise with a fury capable of shattering a legion. In the year 60, while much of the Ninth was campaigning in the north, the Iceni tribe in the east, led by their warrior Queen Boudica, erupted in a firestorm of rebellion. Their grievance was a profound injustice, the brutal annexation of their lands and the public flogging of their queen, and their vengeance was absolute. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was far to the west, and the only major Roman force left in the path of the rebellion was a detachment of the IX Hispana. They marched south to confront the raging horde, confident in their discipline and armor. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Boudica's army, vast and fueled by righteous fury, surrounded the Roman column and annihilated it. The entire infantry complement of the Ninth's detachment was slaughtered. Only the cavalry and its commander managed to cut their way out and escape. This was not a minor setback. It was the near-total destruction of a significant portion of one of Rome's premier legions. The IX Hispana was effectively wiped out as a fighting force in southern Britain that day. The revolt was only finally crushed when Suetonius Paulinus rallied his remaining forces and defeated Boudicca in a desperate, final battle. But the damage was done. The legend of a Celtic queen, who had nearly driven Rome from the island, would have been told and retold in the roundhouses of the north for generations. It was living proof that the legions were not invincible gods, but men who could be broken and beaten. This historical precedent transforms the mystery of the legion's later disappearance. It moves the idea of a native uprising from a mere possibility to a terrifying probability. If a rebellion 50 years earlier could come within a hair's breadth of destroying the Ninth, what could a larger, more organized coalition in the untamed North achieve? The story of Boudicca is not a separate tale, but the first thunderous warning of a danger that would forever stalk the legions of Britannia. The legend of the Lost Legion has escaped the dusty pages of history and found a vibrant new life in our modern world. It thrives not in history books, but on our screens and in our games, constantly being reborn for a new generation. In the long-running series Doctor Who, the Ninth Legion becomes a central plot point, where the time-traveling Doctor discovers the missing soldiers were actually abducted by a sinister alien race. This fantastical twist captures the pure essence of the mystery, transforming historical uncertainty into a canvas for science fiction. The Legion's fate becomes a question not just of what happened, but of what could have happened, allowing writers to explore the infinite possibilities that a historical blank slate provides. Video games have embraced the Legion with even more visceral force. In the acclaimed strategy game Total War, Rome 2, players can command the Ninth Hispana, leading it to a glorious destiny, or, perhaps more fittingly, reliving its tragic end on the digital battlefield. The game does not just tell you the Legion disappeared. It lets you experience the brutal frontier warfare that might have consumed it. You feel the tension of moving a heavy, slow-moving legion through hostile forests, watching for ambushes that could come from any direction. This interactive experience makes the mystery personal. It is no longer a story about 5,000 anonymous soldiers, but about your soldiers, the ones you trained and equipped, suddenly vanishing from the campaign map. This emotional investment is a powerful tool, forging a connection to the past that a simple recitation of facts could never achieve. Why does this particular Roman mystery hold such enduring power in our collective imagination? Our world is increasingly mapped, documented, and explained. We carry devices in our pockets that can tell us our exact location anywhere on Earth. The idea that 5,000 men, the equivalent of a modern brigade, could simply walk off the edge of the known world and leave no trace is profoundly unsettling. It challenges our modern certainty. The Lost Legion represents the ultimate unsolved story, a cold case that is nearly 2,000 years old. It taps into our deep-seated fascination with puzzles that have no clear answer, where the evidence is fragmentary and every theory is just a best guess. We are drawn to these historical black holes because they allow us to become detectives, to sift through the clues ourselves and decide which version of the truth we find most compelling. The story offers a perfect blend of hard historical fact, the solid stone of the York inscription, and boundless imaginative space, the silent mist of northern Britain. It is a tale that is both authentically ancient and eternally relevant, a ghost story written not in words, but in an enduring, echoing silence. The mystery of the Lost Legion is no longer confined to old maps and ancient texts. Today, it is a high-tech hunt, a cold case being reopened with tools the Romans could never have conceived. The most revolutionary of these is l'IDR, or light detection and ranging. Imagine flying a plane over the dense, forested hills of northern Britain. But instead of using cameras, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground. These pulses pierce the thickest canopy, bouncing back to create an exquisitely detailed, three-dimensional map of the Earth's surface. For archaeologists, this is like having X-ray vision. LiDAR surveys have already revealed the ghostly outlines of dozens of temporary Roman marching camps. Their low earthen ramparts, long since smoothed over by time and invisible to the naked eye. Each new discovery is a potential breadcrumb on the legion's final march. One of these faint, rectangular shadows on a Scottish hillside could be the very camp where the IX Hispana made its last stand. A site we have walked over for centuries without ever knowing it was there. But finding the camp is only the first step. The next technology comes down to earth, scanning the ground itself without ever lifting a shovel. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the soil, painting a picture of what lies beneath by reading the reflections. It can detect the subtle differences in soil density that signal a buried ditch, a foundation stone, or something far more telling: the outlines of a mass grave. If the legion was wiped out and its bodies left on the field, the victors might have eventually gathered the remains and buried them in a trench. Ground-penetrating radar is our best hope of finding that silent, final resting place, a dark scar hidden just beneath the grass. Yet, even if we were to find bones, how could we possibly know they belonged to the ninth? This is where the science becomes truly personal, through isotope analysis. The drinking water and food a person consumes in their youth leave a unique chemical signature in their teeth and bones, a geological fingerprint of their homeland. A soldier born and raised in the sunny, mineral-rich hills of Spain would have a completely different isotopic signature than a local Briton or a recruit from Gaul. If we were to unearth a mass grave in northern Britain, filled with skeletons showing the distinct isotopic profile of the Iberian Peninsula, the case would be nearly closed. We would have found the lost legion. The investigation is alive, and the crucial clue could surface at any moment. It might be a metal detectorist finding a single coin minted after the year 108, proving the legion survived longer than we thought. It could be a farmer's plough, turning over the soil and striking the tarnished silver of the legion's eagle. Waiting just beneath the surface, the silence of 2,000 years could be broken by a single, faint signal from a machine, or the glint of metal in the afternoon sun. His name was Lucius. He was not a faceless number in a lost legion, but a young man from the sun-baked hills of Hispania, recruited with promises of citizenship, steady pay, and a pension after 25 years of service. He would have been strong, perhaps the son of a farmer, accustomed to hard work but dazzled by the might of Rome. His enlistment bonus of 300 denarii was a fortune to his family, enough to buy land back home. After swearing his sacred oath to the emperor, he shouldered a pack weighing nearly half his own body weight and began the long march to the edge of the world. For months he walked, his leather sandals wearing thin on the stone-paved roads of Gaul, until he finally saw the grey, choppy waters of the Channel and boarded a ship for the mist-shrouded island of Britannia. His new home was the fortress at Eboracum, a bustling town of wood and stone at the confluence of two rivers. Here, life was a relentless cycle of drills and duty. Before dawn, he was awake, polishing his segmented armor, the lorica segmentata, until it gleamed. His days were filled with marching practice, weapons training with the heavy pilum javelin and the short, stabbing gladius sword, and back-breaking labor. He might be assigned to build a new section of road, cut stone for the fortress walls, or stand watch on the ramparts for hours, staring into the drizzle at a landscape that felt utterly alien. The local beer was terrible, the weather a constant, damp chill that seeped into his bones. He missed the dry heat of Spain, the food of his mother's kitchen, the sound of his native tongue. His world was one of rigid discipline, where minor infractions could bring a flogging, and desertion meant death. Yet within this harsh existence, he built a life. He worshipped a mix of gods, from the official Roman pantheon like Jupiter and Mars to local Celtic deities, and the mysterious Eastern god Mithras, whose underground temples offered brotherhood and solace. He saved his pay, dreaming of the plot of farmland he would one day own. He forged unbreakable bonds with the 7 other men in his tent section, his contubernium, men who shared his rations, his fears, and his hopes. They were his family. This was the reality for Lucius and for the 5,000 other men of the IX Hispana. They were not just soldiers, they were sons, brothers, and fathers. They were men who wrote letters home, who gambled with dice, who complained about their officers, and who dreamed of a peaceful future. Each one had a name, a story, a life filled with its own small triumphs and private sorrows. The mystery of the Legion's disappearance is not an abstract historical puzzle. It is the story of 5,000 Luciuses, 5,000 individual worlds, all snuffed out in a single, unknown moment. Their collective silence is what makes the mist of northern Britain feel so heavy, and their forgotten hopes are the true tragedy of the lost Ninth. He carried the weight of 5,000 lives in his hands, a burden etched into every decision he made. The last commander of the IX Hispana remains a ghost to us, his name lost to time, but we can reconstruct the crushing pressures he faced. His orders would have come directly from the provincial governor, a man whose career depended on presenting a stable and prosperous Britannia to the emperor. The command was likely simple, yet terrifyingly vague. March north and pacify the rebellious tribes. Show the flag, punish the agitators, and reassert Roman dominance beyond the frontier. But what intelligence did he truly possess? Scouts would have brought back fragmented reports, tales of growing unrest among the Caledonian confederations. Yet these were whispers in a foreign tongue, filtered through unreliable interpreters. He knew the land was treacherous, a maze of bogs and forests perfect for ambush. He knew the enemy fought with a ferocity and speed that defied the Roman manual of war. And he would have known the history, the near destruction of his own legion decades earlier under Boudica, a chilling precedent that proved the legions were not invincible. His dilemma was a cruel one. To obey his orders and march deep into hostile territory was to risk everything on incomplete information. But to hesitate, to delay, was to show weakness. In the Roman military mind, hesitation was a sin worse than aggression. A legion that failed to project power became part of the problem, inviting more audacious attacks. He had to balance the aggressive demands of his superiors against the very real safety of his men. Did he push his column too hard, stretching his supply lines to their breaking point in an effort to achieve a swift, decisive victory? Or did he move too cautiously, allowing the enemy to mass and choose the time and place of their attack? Every choice was a gamble with the highest possible stakes. Perhaps the final catastrophe was born from a single, fateful misjudgment. A scout's report might have underestimated the enemy's numbers. A local guide, secretly loyal to the tribes, could have led the legion into a perfectly laid trap. The commander, trusting in the discipline and armor of his men, might have ordered them into a narrow glen from which there was no escape, only realizing his error when the first volley of spears darkened the sky. In that final moment, as the shouts of his centurions were drowned out by the war cries of the tribes, he would have understood the full cost of his command. The eagle was lost, not through cowardice, but through the impossible burden of leading men into the unknown. For the Caledonian warrior watching from the tree-line, the approaching legion was not a glorious army, but a monstrous, alien machine. The Romans were not men, they were a single, scaled beast of iron and wood, moving in unnatural lockstep. Their arrival meant the end of a world. The forests that were the tribe's spiritual homes were being felled for Roman forts. The ancient rhythms of life, governed by the seasons and tribal loyalties, were being replaced by the relentless demands of tax collectors and foreign laws. The Caledonii and their neighbors were not primitive savages. They were heirs to a rich and complex warrior culture. Their society was built around personal bravery, loyalty to one's chieftain and kin, and a deep spiritual connection to the land they fought upon. A warrior proved his worth not in orderly formations, but in individual feats of courage, often fighting in a state of frenzied inspiration. Their knowledge of the terrain was absolute. They knew every hidden path through the bogs, every defensible hilltop, every forest glade where an army could be ambushed. This was not just a tactical advantage, it was a sacred geography, a landscape filled with spirits and ancestral memory. Their motivation was not mere plunder, but survival. The Roman advance was an existential threat, promising to erase their way of life entirely. To them, the destruction of a legion was not a massacre. It was a necessary act of defense, a triumphant reclaiming of their land from a soulless invader. Imagine the strategic genius required, coordinating multiple tribes, setting aside old rivalries to face a common enemy. They would have used the land itself as a weapon, luring the heavy Roman column into a carefully chosen killing ground. They would have harassed its flanks for days, stretching its supply lines and fraying the nerves of its soldiers, before springing the final, devastating trap. This perspective transforms the mystery from a simple tale of Roman loss into a complex story of native resistance. The victory was not a lucky accident. It was the culmination of generations of knowledge, a fierce love for their homeland, and a coordinated will to fight for its survival. The silence that followed was not just the silence of a lost legion, but the triumphant silence of a people who had successfully defended their world, and whose story of that victory was passed down not in stone, but in songs we can no longer hear. The Roman Empire was built on an image of invincible power, a carefully crafted illusion that could not tolerate public failure. So what happens when that illusion is shattered by the total destruction of one of its most storied legions? The very silence that surrounds the IX Hispana points toward a chilling possibility. A state-sanctioned secret so profound it required the erasure of memory itself. The Romans had a formal practice for this, known as damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. This was not a simple omission from the history books. It was a systematic and ritualistic annihilation of a person's existence from the public record. Statues were torn down, their faces chiseled away. Inscriptions bearing the condemned individual's name were systematically defaced. Official documents were altered or destroyed. The goal was to make it as if the disgraced person, often a failed emperor or a traitorous senator, had never existed at all. Could this same brutal logic have been applied to an entire military unit? If the 9th Legion was not just defeated, but disgraced, its sacred eagle standard captured, and its men slaughtered in a manner that exposed the empire's weakness, the incentive to cover it up would have been overwhelming. A public admission of such a catastrophic loss would have been a propaganda disaster. It would embolden enemies on every frontier and shatter the morale of the entire army. For an emperor like Hadrian, who had just taken power and needed to project an image of strength and stability, the truth could have been a political poison. The solution was simple, cold, and brutally effective. Issue a quiet imperial decree, strike the IX Hispana from the military rolls. Forbid any mention of its final, shameful end. Disperse any survivors to other legions under strict orders of silence. Instruct the historians, who often wrote to flatter the regime, to simply skip over the embarrassing incident. The legion's disappearance then becomes not a mystery, but a deliberate act of state-sponsored forgetting. The archaeological silence is no longer an accident of time, but the intended result of a successful cover-up. The crumbling stone in York marks the last moment the Legion was allowed to be remembered. Everything after that was systematically scrubbed from the record, a conspiracy of silence that has lasted for 2,000 years. This theory forces us to ask a deeply unsettling question. Is the true fate of the IX Hispana not lost to history, but deliberately hidden from it, buried not under Scottish soil, but under the weight of imperial pride? The year 108 is our anchor point, the last moment we can say with absolute certainty that the 9th Legion existed. That stone inscription in York marks a fixed star in the growing dark. For the next few years, the historical record is a void. Then, around the year 117, the first ripple appears. The Roman historian Cassius Dio reports a major crisis in Britannia, a time when the Romans were having the worst of it, and a great number of soldiers perished. This is our first potential clue, a wave of violence that coincides perfectly with the Legion's disappearance. The timeline then brings us to the fragile tile from Nijmegen in the modern-day Netherlands. Its stamp, LEGHISP, is our most tantalizing hint of survival, but its date is frustratingly vague, falling somewhere in the early 2nd century. It could be from 110 or 120 or even later. We simply do not know if it was made before or after the crisis in Britain. Then, in 122, a monumental event occurs that speaks louder than any written record. Emperor Hadrian arrives in Britain and orders the construction of his famous wall. This is not a project born from confidence. It is a defensive barrier erected in direct response to a severe military threat, a project that would have been a massive priority just years after a potential disaster. The final clue in our timeline comes decades later, from the eastern edge of the empire. In the year 161, a Roman legion is recorded as being destroyed at the Battle of Eligea. The legion is not named, leaving a gap that some have tried to fill with the ghost of the 9th. But by this point, the legion has been absent from all official military records for nearly 40 years. When you lay these pieces out in order, the puzzle becomes both clearer and more profound. We have a confirmed presence, then a crisis, then an ambiguous artifact, then a defensive wall built in panic, and finally a distant battle involving an anonymous legion. The Nijmegen tile is the outlier, the single piece that does not fit the narrative of a catastrophic end in Britain. Yet it is also the weakest piece of evidence, a whisper against the thunderous silence from the north and the stark, stone reality of Hadrian's Wall. This timeline does not give us an answer. Instead, it frames the entire mystery, showing us the narrow window of time in which the legion vanished, and the conflicting signals that have kept the question alive for 2,000 years. The enduring power of this mystery lies not in the answers we have, but in the vast, echoing silence where the answers should be. We are drawn to the story of the 9th Hispana because it is a perfect historical paradox, a tale built on the tension between a few solid facts and a profound, unsettling void. We know the legion existed, we know it was powerful, and we know it vanished. That is all. This combination makes it the ultimate cold case, a puzzle from the ancient world that invites every one of us to become a detective, to sift through the clues and decide for ourselves which theory feels most true. It is a story that refuses to be solved, and that is precisely its magic. At its heart, the Lost Legion is a powerful symbol of the limits of even the greatest empires. Rome presented itself as an eternal, invincible force, a civilization of perfect order and overwhelming power. The complete and total disappearance of one of its premier military units cracks that facade. It reveals the fragility of that order, reminding us that for all their roads and aqueducts and laws, the Romans were still just men, vulnerable to the chaos of the unknown. The misty highlands of Caledonia were their version of the edge of the map, a place where their certainty faltered and their control simply ended. The story of the Ninth is a humbling lesson in hubris, a whisper from the past that no empire, no matter how mighty, is immune to catastrophe. This mystery also forces us to confront a sobering truth about history itself. We often think of the past as a settled narrative, a collection of facts in a textbook. The tale of the Ninth Hispana shatters that illusion. It is a stark reminder of how much has been irrevocably lost. Countless documents have crumbled to dust. Entire cultures have faded, leaving only fragments behind. For every grand monument like Hadrian's Wall, there are 1,000 untold stories that have vanished without a trace. The silence surrounding these 5,000 men is a monument to all the other silences, to the millions of lives and events that have been erased by time. We are not looking at a complete picture of the Roman world, but at a surviving fragment, and the empty space where another piece should be is just as eloquent as the stone we hold in our hands. Ultimately, the legend of the Ninth Hispana endures because it is a story with a hole in its center, a blank canvas waiting for our imagination. The solid facts, the inscription at York, the tile at Nijmegen, provide just enough structure to make the mystery feel real and grounded. But the vast unknowns are what give it life, allowing for endless speculation, from academic theories to science fiction adventures. It is a narrative that is never finished, constantly being rewritten with each new technological advance or archaeological find. We are not just passive listeners to this story. We are active participants, forever wondering what those final moments were like, and forever hoping that the next turn of the soil might finally, after 2,000 years, break the silence. So we are left with 3 possible endings for the Legion. They may have met a brutal and final end in the misty highlands of Scotland, cut down in an ambush so complete that the land itself swallowed all traces. They could have been quietly disbanded in disgrace, their proud name erased from the army lists by an empire that could not bear the shame of their failure. Or perhaps they marched east, only to be annihilated decades later in a distant Parthian war, their true fate lost in the chaos of another frontier. Each theory has its clues, and each its fatal flaws. Without that one undeniable piece of evidence, a mass grave filled with Spanish isotopes, or the tarnished silver of their eagle standard, the truth remains a ghost, flickering just beyond our reach. But this is not a story that ends with a period. It ends with a question mark, an invitation. The mystery of the Ninth Hispana is alive. It lives in every new LiDAR scan of a Scottish hillside, in every turn of a farmer's plough, in every curious mind that hears the tale and wonders. What do you think happened to those 5,000 men? Share your theory in the comments below, and let the investigation continue. Read the ancient sources for yourself, follow the work of modern archaeologists, and stay curious. The next great discovery, the one that finally solves this ancient cold case, could be waiting just beneath the surface, and it might be you who hears its whisper first.